apologia. Far from being novel, the idea peddled by Cooper that Churchill was a warmonger who, quote, turned the invasion of Poland into a global war because, quote, he was funded by Zionist financiers, formed the core of wartime propaganda fabricated by Nazi spin doctor Joseph Goebbels. The argument that Cooper advances that
So is Douglas Murray the credentialed historian that gets to legislate what history is supposed to take place on the internet? Or is it supposed to be some sort of other administrative body that should be able to rule in Douglas's favor? Is there a court in which these opinions should be presented?
Because if you notice, Rob, it's a very good point, because if you notice, and then, you know, he's veering into Konstantin here, which is, again, it's identical to woke leftists. I don't even know. I know, you know, sometimes I'll argue that they're the woke right, but they're not. They're the left. They're just woke. I don't know. It's, oh, yes, Nazi apology. If you're not even allowed to discuss these issues, you're not allowed to look at anything from the other point of view, even when he says things that are mainstream history. Like there's the claim that Adolf Hitler was downplaying his anti-Semitism in the early 30s. There's I'm blanking on the historian's name, but he did a whole thing on this about how at the Olympics, I think it was Sagar and Jetty was just talking about this on Breaking Points, or maybe it was Ryan. One of them was talking about this. But I had read this book many years ago, but there's I think it was 1936 Olympics, the ones that are in Germany, the ones where you see Hitler tweaking out like a maniac there. They like took down a whole bunch of the anti-Jewish stuff when they were hosting the Olympics, because they kind of knew this isn't going to play that well in the rest of the world. And this is before the war. They were still kind of, you're like all nation states, they're trying to maintain good standing. But anyway, it's just, oh, you're a Nazi. You're not. This is straight from Goebbels or something. It's like, it's just so cheap and lame. But to your point, he just kind of throws in there as an assertion that to people who have really studied World War II, like Douglas Murray, like what, they never seem to have to explain, like, by what metric have you decided that Douglas Murray has studied World War II more than Daryl Cooper? Like, listen.
Dave Smith claps back at Konstantin Kisin over this whole who's an expert and who should be talking about this or whatnot. This whole controversy started when Dave Smith went to debate Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan. And ever since then, it's just been, people have been talking about it. When Douglas Murray was like, oh, pish posh, you're not an expert. And so now a whole other conversation started about who's allowed to talk about what. Well, Konstantin Kisin has weighed in on it, and Dave Smith has a response for him. Let's see what Dave Smith has to say.
The rationale behind my thought process seemed solid. After all, the medium is the message. The reason I thought our conversations about politics, culture, and entertainment had become so fake was the rapidly shrinking soundbite and a media elite more interested in winning than learning. Journalism, academia, and politics merged into a monoculture whose consensus rested primarily on the vigorous inhalation of gases emanating from their own backsides into which they'd firmly inserted their heads. I don't know anyone who voted for Trump, was their mantra. Far from being a confession of ignorance and a lack of perspective, this phrase was uttered with pride at dinner parties to signal membership of the elite class. The response from this contingent to the sequential dismantling of their core assumptions about the way the world works was an attempt to use credentialism to make reality go away. Experts think vaccinating newborns against COVID is essential. Now pipe down, mask up, and follow the science, TM. In decades past, absent the ability to make their voices heard, the proles would have had to grumble away about big pharma in obscurity, as people, mostly hippie lefties, had been doing for ages. But thanks to the technological revolution, which reduced the cost of running a major broadcasting channel from millions of dollars to the price of a smartphone, the era of keeping was well and truly over. The discredited mainstream media continued to peddle lie after lie in an attempt to keep its political opponents from governing and being re-elected. But it then faced a powerful counterweight. Elon Musk ended the regime of censorship and enforcement bias in the digital public square of Twitter, declaring, You are the media now, as major podcasts and YouTube shows secured audiences most mainstream media outlets can now only dream of. By the time of the last year's presidential election in America, the rise of new media had become undeniable, with many rightly calling it the podcast election. Curious, open-minded, inquisitive podcasters, unrestrained by the need to comply with corporate media message discipline and social media censorship, were finally able to speak freely, seek the truth, and debate controversial ideas in good faith in front of grateful audiences of millions.
Okay,
so far, so wonderful.
We could pause it right
After
there.
all,
I could not agree more with the so far so wonderful point. So this is, I mean, I think a pretty good start that me and you, Rob, would probably largely agree with. I mean, I do think to some degree he's underselling exactly how corrupt and evil the old media guard was. But more or less, that's, I think what he's starting with there is exactly right. And it's exactly the type of stuff that we've been saying for a long time on this show. There's just no question that this is what's happened. You know, I mean, the corporate media lost all of their trust. They were lying and weaponizing these lies to maintain power. It got to a point where everyone saw through it, and now people are pursuing alternate voices. I guess the only thing in there that I'd kind of disagree with is that there was never, you know, when he says the era of gatekeeping was finally over, well, that's not exactly ever true. It's never the case that there's no gatekeeping. You know what I'm saying? Like there's always, it's just became a much more decentralized group of gatekeepers, but there's still always going to be some voices who get in and some voices who don't. Every show, no matter what the show is, they get to choose who they have on and who they don't have on. It's just that you don't get to gatekeep in the same way. So like, let's say, for example, you're talking about the idea of vaccines. Well, the pharmaceutical companies, with their somewhat significant influence over the corporate media, can gatekeep voices like Bobby Kennedy from ever getting on there. But if Joe Rogan wants to have Bobby Kennedy on, there's nothing they could do about it. The same can also be said for the military-industrial complex. I mean, if you turn on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, you are hearing from former CIA director, former Pentagon employee, former director of national intelligence, but you're not hearing voices like whether left or right. You're just not hearing the people who are outside of that, or very rarely hearing the people who are outside of that establishment. But now Tucker Carlson gets to decide. It's not up to some suit in a corporation somewhere. It's up to the guy who's built the trust with his audience, like it or not. So anyway, that would just be my only bit of critique there. But a good start from Konstantin Kisin. It seems like we've got a great bit of content here. He gets it. We'll see. Any thoughts on any of this, Rob?
Well, I'm looking forward to the pivot to, hey, but there's this one thing that's just too important for people to be allowed to have freedom.
But not Israel. Everything else is fine. Yeah. Just not. Whoa. We got wars to fight here.
And okay. That's different than when you heard that pitch from people that wanted to tell you that about global warming. And that's different than when you heard it about COVID. And it's different when you heard it countless other times. But this one is actually so important that we can't allow for that freedom thing because people are getting it wrong.
There you go. Okay, let's keep playing.
Well, what could go wrong with democratizing information? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. Just as the assumptions of the elite class were proved wrong by the actions of their fellow citizens during the era of Trump, Brexit, and COVID, the assumptions some of us held about the future of the media are now crumbling before our very eyes. With politics becoming the primary form of entertainment in Western society, more of us now get our news and opinions from entertainers rather than serious commentators, and, just as importantly, we often struggle to tell the difference between the two. Now, having transitioned from a career in comedy to my current role as writer, interviewer, and political commentator, I can hardly complain about the meshing of culture, politics, and entertainment. And I am not complaining. I'm merely pointing out that the incentive structures and thought patterns we would typically associate with the entertainment business are not the same as those we would expect to see in journalism and academia. This difference was perfectly illustrated in the recent debate between journalist and author Douglas Murray, and comedian and podcaster Dave Smith on the Joe Rogan Experience, the world's biggest podcast. Officially, the full 3-hour discussion was mostly about the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, with Smith being in the so-called anti-war camp and Murray being a supporter of both Israel's campaign to eliminate Hamas and Ukraine's struggle to retain its sovereignty and independence. These conflicts and both men's positions have been debated endlessly. That part of the discussion is less relevant here. The much more interesting fault lines were exposed on the fringes of the debate. The conversation began with a...
That's a mighty convenient approach to have. It's a mighty convenient... Sorry, go ahead.
The bulk of the conversation or the substance of it.
Like, I mean, it's wild to me how many people who want to find a way to defend Douglas Murray in this debate, which just on so many levels to me seems to be like a crazy losing game. Like, why would you want to go down with this sinking ship? But okay. But really to just brush away, forget about any of the content of the debate. That's been debated before. Well, okay, but like there's 2 wars raging on right now. After, again, as I've made the point before, I often call what's going on in Gaza a war. Not really sure that's the appropriate name for it. But no, I am sorry, especially if you're going to be talking about like journalistic standards and the difference between entertainers and commentators, which again, as Konstantin admits himself, he's essentially the same thing I am. I mean, I guess he doesn't still do comedy. I still do comedy, but he's a guy talking about issues that he cares about on a podcast who is not an expert in any of these areas. But isn't it awfully convenient how there could be so much discussed and written about, like my standards or my lack of expertise or all of this, and none of them ever want to do is point to like, Dave got these 5 things wrong. Douglas Murray demonstrated his expertise in this point. It's never that. And in fact, he just openly, imagine like starting your review of a debate and then openly going, hey, I'm not so interested in the debate. Forget that part. But how about the other part? Like whatever, we'll see what he's about to say here. But it is just, I don't know. I do find it incredibly revealing that anybody would be giving their take, writing their most read article on a debate and just totally take a backdoor out of the substance of any of the debate. I don't know. I
mean, you could argue that's coming from both sides, though. A lot of people that are coming down on Douglas Murray as well, I'm pretty sure didn't watch the whole debate. I'm not saying that in order to come down on Douglas Murray, you didn't have to watch the debate. I'm just saying that I'm sure it happens on both sides. Pretty sure there are people on both sides, whether you thought Douglas Murray did well or whether you thought Douglas Murray had a point or if you thought Dave Smith had a point. I'm pretty sure a lot of people didn't see the whole debates. So a lot of people are speaking from things they don't know much about. I mean, including myself. I didn't see the debate at all. But the thing is, I only commented on that one part where Douglas Murray started being like, oh, are you an expert? Because in my opinion, if you have to resort to just be like, well, have you ever been there? Are you an expert? I think you lost. And that's what I commented on, and that's what I said. I even said that in terms of Dave Smith's views on the whole Israel and Palestine conflict, I don't even completely agree with Dave Smith. But just on the virtue alone that if you have to resort to just being like, are you even an expert? I think it shows that you lost. Because if you, as Dave's kind of pointing out here, if you really know better, if you really are more of an expert than Dave, then you make it through your points. Like that's how people usually win. That's how you win debates. You make better arguments and you make better points. You don't just sit there and be like, oh, well, who are you? What do you know?
Very strange. Oh man, this is my most read article I've ever written. It was about the Lakers-Knicks game last night. But forget about the game. Let's just talk about the halftime show or whatever. It's just very bizarre to me. But all right.
And do they have a specific credentialing system that they'd like to speak to for who would be qualified to be a commentator on these issues? Because I feel like if you took our track record against Rachel Maddow, we probably have a better track record of better political analysis about basically everything from the time that I've been on this podcast. So we'll be back to just if MSNBC platforms someone, are they endorsing Rachel Maddow right now and saying that that's the kind of expert class that we should be listening to? Or what is there some sort of a test people are supposed to take? And what test would be better than the track record of commentary and the legacy of getting things right than you and I have? So I'm curious to know in this discussion of that we need to go back to some sort of a credentialing standard, what specifically is the standard that they're advocating for? And then give me the specific names. Who are supposed to be the voices of reason? Or where are they supposed to have come from that they now have the standard of a stamp of approval?
We can't just Rob, you can't just have podcasters talking about these things, says a podcaster. There's no problem having Dave Rubin and Bill Maher talk about them. We need experts. But like they're supposed to be experts. No. What this all is just a naked, like, I don't like that they disagree with me. I don't like the people who are critical of Israel or critical of Ukraine. I don't like them getting platformed. Essentially what's happening here, and this is just the fact, right, is that our side is winning. We're winning the battle on the podcast front. And yes, I mean, Konstantin kind of lays it out there. Yes, this became the new center of where the American political conversation is happening. And because, and in large part, it's because, well, I mean, it's a mix of things, but in large part, it has to do with the fact that the biggest podcasters happen to be really open to this anti-war point of view. You know, and they've heard people make the anti-war argument, and they're like, shit, that is really compelling. In the case of Tucker Carlson, for example, I mean, he's really like, you know, what went from being kind of like essentially a neocon and then went to Iraq. He's been there and then got turned around on it and was like, oh my God, this is a disaster, what we're doing here. But so because of that now, the gatekeepers, the new decentralized gatekeepers, aren't keeping the anti-war voices out. And so we've got a shot now to make our argument, and we're winning. And then you could see this in opinion polls. Support for the war in Ukraine has gone way down since the beginning of the war. And support for the war or Israel's assault on Gaza has gone way down, particularly with the younger generation. And so this is essentially it. It's like you're losing the argument. And so now we got to figure out, you know, how to plug up this hole. All right, guys, let's take a moment.
Ads. So listen, first off, let me shill myself. What do you think of this so far? Leave a comment down below. Give this video a like if you like it. Subscribe to my channel. So his theory is that they think they're losing the argument, so now they must censor, which, I mean, it's a possibility. We've seen that before. We saw it with C-19. We've seen it with the election. We've seen many instances with the last few years where one side's losing, and so therefore they shut down the conversation entirely. Now, I don't see that quite happening here to this extent. You know, I haven't seen YouTube or even X or Facebook or any of these take down posts that are anti-Israel or anything like that. I haven't seen any of that. The closest thing you have is, you know, Donald Trump defunding colleges for anti-Semitism and such, or allowing anti-Semitism. That's the closest that we've seen to any kind of censorship. But even then, I still don't see the level as it was before, where you couldn't even talk about transgenderism in a negative way or anything, or else you could get your post deleted or on timeout or suspended or permanently banned. We're not seeing that level of stuff. There is still conversations had. It's just you're having one side now being like, oh, but all you even experts?
It's the new Ministry of Truth can be Douglas Murray and Konstantin Kisin.
Or maybe the FCC should take over podcasting and also make sure that there's no curse words or sexual content of any kind. I mean, what legislative body is supposed to reside over this misinformation on the internet and make sure that it does not appear, so that Israel can continue to have public support?
Well, it's let's see if Konstantin lays it out. It's an interesting question, Rob. Here, let's keep playing.
Discussion of Rogan's decision to host Darryl Cooper, a man described by Tucker Carlson as America's most important popular historian. Cooper himself has the self-awareness not to own the label of historian, instead describing himself as a storyteller. His latest work is a series whose aim is to show World War II from the perspective of the Germans. To those who have studied World War II extensively, like Murray, Cooper's comments on Tucker Carlson's show and his podcast with Joe Rogan are obvious and frankly boringly familiar Nazi apologia. Far from being novel, the idea peddled by Cooper that Churchill was a warmonger who, quote, turned the invasion of Poland into a global war because, quote, he was funded by Zionist financiers, formed the core of wartime propaganda fabricated by Nazi spin doctor Joseph Goebbels. The argument that Cooper advances that
So is Douglas Murray the credentialed historian that gets to legislate what history is supposed to take place on the internet? Or is it supposed to be some sort of other administrative body that should be able to rule in Douglas's favor? Is there a court in which these opinions
because if you notice, Rob, it's a very good point, because if you notice, and then, he's veering into Konstantin here, which is, again, it's identical to woke leftists. I don't even know. I know, sometimes I'll argue that they're the woke right, but they're not. They're the left. They're just woke. I don't know. It's, oh, yes, Nazi apology. If you're not even allowed to discuss these issues, you're not allowed to look at anything from the other point of view, even when he says things that are mainstream history. Like there's the claim that Adolf Hitler was downplaying his anti-Semitism in the early 30s. There's I'm blanking on the historian's name, but he did a whole thing on this about how at the Olympics, I think it was Sagar and Jetty was just talking about this on Breaking Points, or maybe it was Ryan. One of them was talking about this. But I had read this book many years ago, but there's I think it was 1936 Olympics, the ones that are in Germany, the ones where you see Hitler tweaking out like a maniac there. They took down a whole bunch of the anti-Jewish stuff when they were hosting the Olympics, because they kind of knew this isn't going to play that well in the rest of the world. And this is before the war. They were still kind of, you're like all nation states, they're trying to maintain good standing. But anyway, it's just, oh, you're a Nazi. You're not. This is straight from Goebbels or something. And it's just so cheap and lame. But to your point, he just kind of throws in there as an assertion that to people who have really studied World War II, like Douglas Murray, they never seem to have to explain, by what metric have you decided that Douglas Murray has studied World War II more than Darryl Cooper? Listen, again, there are levels to intelligence, and there are levels to knowledge. And I think that this is one of the things where when I was admitting I'm not an expert, I've had a lot of people on Twitter be like, Dave, you are an expert. You should just say you're an expert, dude, and be done with this debate. And it's no, I'm not. Here's the thing. It's in the same way that you could okay, let's imagine me and you are sitting down and let's say we're playing basketball, and there is the number one high school player in America. You're talking Kobe Bryant when he was 17 is sitting there, and it'd be very easy for me and you to be like, that's the best basketball player in the world. This is just insane. He just did a 360 dunk. This guy's lightning quick. He's 6'8". This guy's just incredible. But then to someone who plays in the NBA, they'd be like, slow down. There's levels to this shit. And much like as a lot of people who fight, they talk about this. It's the better at fighting you get, the more you realize how much you suck at fighting, because you become a purple belt, and it's oh my God, you could kick anybody's ass. And you're I roll with brown belts and black belts all day. I could not kick anybody. So anyway, I say all of that just to say this, for anybody who's consumed Darryl Cooper's work, feel however you feel about him. You could completely disagree with his politics or his conclusions or any of this. The dude is insanely well researched. Insane. I genuinely think he's probably read over 100 books about Israel Palestine. He's read everything, dude. It's just, and so for him to just casually, and I know Darryl, and I know anybody who actually knows his work knows if he's doing a World War II series, he is going to be reading everything about it. So how he just gets to claim that Douglas Murray really does his research, and he does. Do you guys ever feel the need? Do you ever have to show your work on these claims? How do you know that? How do you know what Douglas Murray's read versus what Daryl Cooper's read? By what metric are you making the decision that he's the one who's done his research and he isn't? I don't. And by the way, that doesn't mean who's right or wrong. These are two very different claims, right? Like there are people who are extremely well read who are wrong about everything politically, but like the way they just get to play this game and just dismiss Daryl, it's pathetic. It's like this is not, again, not an argument. None of this is an argument. This is just assertions backed by nothing.
I mean, yeah, it's true. Even the guy that what John Spencer, I think his name was, who debated Dave Smith on the Piers Morgan video, on the Piers Morgan show. I did a video on it. Even he was like, yeah, I don't think we should be platforming these people that don't have the proper knowledge, essentially. Like, oh yeah, if they're going to be up there spreading like fake news or things that aren't true, they shouldn't be platformed. And it's same arguments from the woke. And even though I thought John Spencer did a better job at arguing his points against Dave Smith, I thought John Spencer did better in that debate. But he lost me when he said, well, we shouldn't platform these people who spread this stuff. It's like, okay, so what do you want to do? Like people who, it would be one thing if you had someone that claimed to be an expert and it turns out they were just someone random off the street and you didn't do your vetting or your research. But, you know, if you have Dave Smith, the podcaster comedian, and you have him because people know that he's a podcaster comedian and you just want to hear his thoughts on what's going on there, I don't think there should be a problem with that. What's Joe Rogan supposed to do? Give everyone a test to see how much they know before they come on the show?
You need censorship because too many people are listening to the other people.
Seems to be what it boils down to. But okay, I mean, they would claim they're not advocating censorship, but it's like, what exactly are you advocating then? Are you advocating Joe Rogan stop having me and Daryl Cooper on the show? Because what's really the substantive difference between that and advocating censorship?
Well, only they're credentialed people who aren't actually credentialed, such as Douglas Murray.
Right, who have lots of different opinions on lots of different subjects. We can hear from all of them. You could even be a comedian who hosts a podcast, and then you could talk about serious things. We could have a range of opinions, except for war. Except for when it comes to war, in which case we all must be lockstep on the side of these disastrous conflicts that all of you guys support that never work out. You know, it's crazy. It's whatever. Anyway, I'm sure. I know Douglas was saying he downplayed it. People have sent me since then, but I should have had. This is one area I fucked up on a little bit. I should have had that more in the front of my mind. But when I was like, didn't you go to Ukraine and write that article saying that Ukraine will win? And he goes, no, I didn't say that. I said it was possible Ukraine. Right? Go read the article. The line is, Ukraine will win. Russia will lose. Okay. So sorry, guys. Yeah, you guys got it. Much like the COVID experts, you guys have been too spectacularly wrong for too long, and you're losing. You're losing the argument.
Sometimes, it's an expert from the regime based on how many things they've gotten wrong. And so perhaps that's specifically why we need to listen to these people more, is because of their track record of getting things so wrong. That's how you know that they're credentialed regime experts.
It does seem to be the standard. All right, let's keep playing.
Millions of prisoners of war and civilians died on the Eastern Front because the Nazis failed to plan properly for the invasion is simply a lie. There is extensive documentary evidence which confirms that the reason millions of prisoners of war and civilians died on the Eastern Front is precisely because the Nazis succeeded in their plans. Because Murray is educated on this issue, he assumes that everyone else, including Smith, is too. Exasperated, he tries to explain that far from being revolutionary, these ideas have been pushed by discredited historians like David Irving for decades. Have you listened to his podcast, though?
Okay, can you just pause it for a second? So here's just an interesting little thing that you might notice. And again, listen, Konstantin, like what you're engaged in here is propaganda. Like this is just pure bullshit. And it's not, again, it's always what it always relies on. Like if you notice with these videos, right? And this is why I say it's propaganda. You're reviewing a debate and brushing aside the debate. You're talking about expertise, but you're not pointing out anything that I got wrong. You're not, with Daryl Cooper, you're not going, okay, here, he had the Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, or he had the Anti-Humans, or he's had these big, huge series, and you're not going like, this is riddled with inaccuracies, and here are 5 of them. You're not doing that. What you're doing is taking a couple of sentences, taking them wildly out of context, misrepresenting them. What Daryl Cooper actually said, he did not make the claim that the Nazis didn't intentionally kill people in Eastern Europe. That was not his claim. What he was saying was essentially, and he said that this applies to Israel also. So what ended up, he started making this point, then Tucker kind of went on a different path, and then he never got back to like really finishing the point. But the thing he was making was actually, what he was doing was attacking neo-Nazis, actually. What he was doing was attacking the defenders of the Nazi regime. He was saying that it doesn't even matter because you're responsible either way. So in other words, his point was, Rob, I don't know if you saw him make this, but he was saying, listen, if you're Israel and you go into Gaza and then you don't have a plan for how to get innocent civilians to safety, well, that's on you. And it doesn't matter whether it was intentional or not intentional or nothing. It's your responsibility now once you commit the invasion. And so likewise, he was saying, even to because one of the things he brought up, and this is it was a letter from like one of the Nazis back to Germany who was out in Eastern Europe, and I guess it was I think it was in 1940 if I'm remembering correctly. But so he said basically they're in the middle of the war. There's a lot of devastation, and he was writing back going like, listen, like all these Jews that we got in these camps, or maybe not just the Jews, but whoever was in these concentration camps, he goes, I think a lot of them are going to starve to death, and it might be more humane to just execute them or something like that. But Daryl was saying like, look, even if that's the case, that even if you're saying like, oh, it was just like in the war, they didn't mean to do any of this or nothing. He goes, it's still a bullshit excuse because it doesn't matter. You invaded these countries, you set up these camps with no plans for how to take care of these people, and you're still responsible for it. So he wasn't making the argument that they never did this intentionally. He was saying, even if you make that argument, the argument still fails. That was the point. So again, Daryl Cooper just wrote a piece the other day. I still have not gotten a chance to.
I mean, Hamas uses their own citizens as shields, and they use civilian areas for military purposes. So listen, I'm not sitting here and saying Israel did nothing wrong or anything like that. I'm not just defending Israel. I'm just saying that like it takes two to tango here. And I don't see Hamas doing like a much better job at trying to protect its own citizens.
But Daryl Cooper just wrote a piece last week, condemning anti-Semitism. None of them will ever bring that one up. They always bring up the three lines that they like to take out of context. They never bring that up. But aside from that, there's, a Konstantin here. And this is what I mean, like when it's starting to get into propaganda, is that he sits there and he goes, actually, you know what? Bring it back a second, Natalie, because I want to make sure. Let me get this right, because I distracted myself in this rant. Just bring it back a few seconds, because I want to get the point that he was making.
Far from being revolutionary, these ideas have been pushed by discredited historians.
Okay, you
like
can
David
stop it right there. Thank you. That's all I needed. So this is the other thing that's propaganda here. Okay. And you remember, I give Michael Malice a lot of credit for being the one who pointed this out to me. And then as soon as he points it out, you go, oh, that's a really, really good point. But his point was, he goes, you remember when they tried to cancel Joe Rogan last time? I'm sorry that I might have brought another one on him, but it'll fail. So it's cool. But so last time they were trying to cancel him over the COVID stuff, and you remember, do you guys remember? I'm sure, Natalie, you weren't with us on the show there, but I'm sure you remember at this point, every single person in the corporate media, all of them, all said horse dewormer. Joe Rogan is taking horse dewormer. Now, ivermectin, the drug, first of all, I think it's been prescribed 1 billion times to people. It's people have won Nobel Prizes for ivermectin and stuff. It's like, it's people medicine. Now it's also veterinary medicine, but it's given to like hundreds of different species of animals. Now, one of those things is for horse deworming. And yet they all picked that one. Like, just think about that from like a mathematical point of view. Like the odds of that are like 1 in 100 billion or something like that, that you would all pick the one thing. If there's like tens of thousands of different options, and every single person in the mainstream media happened to pick this one. Why is that? Okay, because they all decided that this was the most discrediting thing to say, that this is the thing that would make him look the worst. So likewise, where'd you get David Irving from? Why are you saying, okay, now it is true that David Irving may have shared some of these views, but Pat Buchanan wrote a whole book about it. Pat Buchanan was a speechwriter for Richard Nixon. He worked in the Ronald Reagan White House, and I think he worked in one other. I believe he was in 3 White Houses. He ran for president twice. He's a New York Times bestseller. He was on TV and wrote a very successful column for like 50 years. He's a household name, more or less, in this space. Why aren't you picking him? Why are you saying this is from David Irving? You know why, Rob? Because David Irving was also a Holocaust revisionist. He also, I don't remember, I don't know enough to know exactly. They'd call him a Holocaust denier. I think his argument was that it was like a couple million people, but it wasn't 6 million people. Regardless of any of that, they could, you know what I mean? Like say, oh, he's regurgitating Pat Buchanan's thing. Why do they all pick David Irving? For the obvious guilt by association thing, to smear him as a Holocaust denier, even though he's never once done that. Like, I'm sorry, this is a woke leftist tactic. Like, I don't, and this is why it's such a losing, like all of this to me, and don't get me wrong, I'm taking on this stuff because I think it's a bad argument. I think they're wrong. And I'm actually shocked by how bad the argument is. But what the thing that's been so strange for me over the last couple weeks is that you're just like, I can't believe you guys all want to go down this path. Like, you really want to sit here and argue on behalf of the expert class and these issues have been dealt with long ago. But what does that mean? Like when someone like Konstantin will say the reason why Douglas Murray is so frustrated is because we've already batted down all these stupid ideas. But I think for a lot of us, we go, oh yeah, but that was back when the evil machine had full control of everything. Maybe we didn't really bat down these ideas. Maybe Pat Buchanan was right about all those things he was saying. I mean, I don't know. Yes, it is true to some degree that Douglas Murray's ideas won the day and people like Pat Buchanan and Ron Paul's ideas lost the day. But what have we gotten for that? And at a certain point, if we figure out that we've been lied to about everything for the last 20 years, some people might go, well, what were they saying 30 years ago? What were they saying 40 years ago? What were they saying 60 years ago? It's a natural reaction. That doesn't mean everything they were saying is wrong, but it definitely means you can't just dismiss it away as that's already been taken care of.
So this is a tough one because, listen, Dave Smith has a good point. Like, it is a woke left tactic, to be like, oh, well, this is misinformation. Oh, you shouldn't platform these people. Oh, like this, and that. But it's also like a woke kind of thing, too, to be like, well, like if we're going to be debating ideas, I guess what I'm trying to say is this line of thinking also leads us to debating what a woman is. And it's like, well, isn't that something we figured out a long time ago? But now it's like we have in the name of progress or something like that. Like now we're debating things that should have been settled a long time ago. And the thing is too, is that like, that line of thinking about what were they lying to us this long ago. I'm not saying it's not a valid point. I'm not saying it's not something valid to think about. Definitely. It's always something that's going to be in the back of your mind. But also that line of thinking like leads down flat earth stuff. How do you think flat earthers come to be? I've seen a lot of flat earth debates. And the one thing that they all seem to have in common is that they can't trust the government. Okay, that leads to like moon landing denialism. That leads to like, well, what if the earth is really flat or it's not round? After all, it was taught us that by our school system. And you know how much our government school system lied to us? If they lied to us about this, why wouldn't they lie to us about the earth being flat? I'm not saying, so again, because I know I'm going to get people in the comments like, listen, I'm not saying it's not valid to question things. Obviously, it's always valid to question things. I also think it's also wrong to not platform people because they might spread misinformation. I think people should be allowed to talk and discuss things. I guess what I'm just saying is if you're not careful, like it could lead you down a rabbit hole where then you become, everything comes about the Jews, and but my gravity, or but my flat earth. So I guess my advice with all this stuff is just this. Number one, people should be allowed to go on shows and talk about things if the people that run the shows want to have them on. No, we shouldn't have this, oh, are you an expert thing? Two, I guess that's where you got to improve your critical thinking skills, because no matter what you research, no matter who you listen to, you're going to always be following someone else's propaganda, no matter what. It doesn't matter if you get your information from the government, like the schooling system. It doesn't matter if you get it from a podcaster like Dave Smith. It doesn't matter if you get it from a Douglas Murray. You're going to be getting your information from someone else. And that's why with me, like, I don't have this deep investment into what's going on in Israel and Palestine, because at the end of the day, I don't have the answers, and I don't know what could solve it, and I don't know why they keep fighting. Israel says, Palestine started it. Palestine says Israel started it. Both could probably point to valid things that the other side did wrong. If you want to have arguments of if we should be funding this or not, that's one thing, because that does have to do with us. It's our tax dollars. But then you get into this whole other argument too, where it's like, do we know enough about how war goes on that we should really even have a say? It goes down to the voting stuff again. You know what I mean? The whole who should vote conversation. It goes down all this stuff that we should, I guess, really should be thinking about and having conversations about. I don't know. I'm just a dumb YouTuber. And those are just my thoughts. Take with them what you will. What do you think about this whole thing? What do you think about what Dave Smith had to say about Konstantin Kisin? If you want to see this whole thing, I have a link down to the original video down in the description below if you want to see what the rest of what Dave Smith had to say. If you like this video, give it a like. If you really liked it, please consider subscribing to my channel. It really helped me out a lot. If you like seeing Dave Smith, I have a whole playlist featuring him, and I have a whole bunch of content like this that I think you'll really enjoy.